that definitely wasn't pretty, but a win's a win. Although, I guess technically in hockey, that's not even true, considering if it gets to overtime, the opposing team then gets credit for, well, basically half of a win. At least for the Kraken, though, it is a win. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken hang on to beat the lowly Anaheim Ducks 5-4 in regulation. This one was a game against a Ducks team that's not only last in the division, but also among the worst teams in the NHL, and a front runner for Connor Bedard, or at least the first overall pick, regardless of who that ends up being by the time that rolls around. And so, with the Kraken being second in the division at this point in the season and playing very good hockey as a whole, definitely a game that the Kraken should have won and really shouldn't have been that close. And because this is hockey, a game played on ice with a small frozen rubber disc that you whack around with sticks where anything can happen, saying that there's a game where the Kraken should definitely win it, especially considering how last season went, is not something that I've said very often. In fact, I can really only ever think of one other game that I came into feeling that the Kraken really had no business losing it like I did with this one. And that was the first game against Arizona last year before we really knew how that season was going to go. And the Kraken ended up losing that one. So, yeah, also turns out to be the game that I've been the most frustrated or even downright angry after. And maybe it was for that reason, or because the Kraken were just coming off of a high-energy, exciting win against the best team in the division, then making this a bit of a trap game, that I came into this one being a bit nervous about how it could end up going. As it turns out, I may have had good reason to feel that way. And I'm not talking about the fun, kind of hopeful nervous about how the game could go maybe positive for your team. Honestly, kind of how I felt going into the game against Vegas. The same kind of nervous that Mariners fans felt in the rare occasions over the last 20 years where it looked like they might actually make the playoffs, and then this year when they actually did. No, this particular game was much more that type of nervous, and again, maybe for the first or second time in Kraken history, that is more fueled by dread for how it's going to feel if things don't go the way that you expect them to. The kind of nervous that Seahawks fans felt for the better part of a decade after, or I guess before, most games. And especially in a lot of fourth quarters where they needed to make comebacks. And look, don't get me wrong, in the grand scheme of things, this is probably a better kind of nerves to have. After all, if you're nervous because you dread something going wrong, it probably means that you actually have expectations that things go well for your team, and as a whole, they're probably going better more often than not. Whereas, if you're nervous because something might actually go right for your team and you're feeling hopeful, then that's probably because not a lot of things have been going well in the first place. I don't know, maybe none of that even makes sense, but what I will say is that while it is fun to finally have expectations for this team for really the first time since the beginning of last year, or maybe even the first time in general, with expectations for success, it does also mean that when things get frustrating, that frustration is amplified. I mean, just look at Steve Dangle over the last few years. Or to tie it into the NFL again, look at any Broncos fan this year. I mean, I'd say the same for Rams fans, but they'd have to exist first. Anyway, regardless of all that, and even if it was a bit frustrating how they managed to make it happen, the Kraken again did end up winning this game 5-4 in regulation, not having to go to overtime for a second time against the Ducks. And on top of that, it is actually, for the second time this season, their fifth game in a row for another 5-game winning streak, which I think makes them the only team in the NHL so far to have 2 5-game winning streaks, or at least 2 separate ones anyway. There's been a couple of teams with 10-game winning streaks, which would kind of be like back-to-back 5 games, but you get my point. And since I brought up that game against Arizona last year, as we get into this game, in which there's lineup-wise no changes other than Martin Jones in net instead of Grubauer, the Kraken, just like that game in Arizona, get on the board first quickly. Within just seconds of puck drop, the Kraken are into the offensive zone and get a shot off on goal, and while the save is made, it leads to a face-off in the offensive zone just to the right of the goal. Beniers wins that faceoff out to Eberle on the boards. Eberle gets a pass quickly from the boards out to McCann in front of the net, where McCann is able to pull that puck from one side to the other around Gibson and put it into the back of the net to give the Kraken the early 1-0 lead just 33 seconds into the game. And then, also like that Arizona game, although it does take a few minutes in this one rather than a few seconds like it did there, the Kraken would end up taking the 2-0 lead as well. As just about 7 minutes into the game, in which to this point, while the shots are fairly even, the Kraken have definitely been getting the better, or certainly more dangerous scoring opportunities, and that just continues here as they press back into the offensive zone. Larson gets the puck from up by the blue line down to Burakovsky, who quickly gets it across the crease to Wenberg on the other side. Wenberg goes from backhand to forehand and into the back of the net, before Gibson came back across and once again gives the Kraken that 2-0 lead. So for the Kraken, a pretty good start to this one, and honestly probably the start that you would expect given the opponent and how things have been going for Seattle, at least lately anyway. But that's just when the whistles start coming out. First, about halfway through the first, it's sprung to the box on a hooking call, and while the Kraken do eventually kill off this first Ducks power play successfully, it's a Ducks power play that ends up looking pretty dangerous and getting a number of chances off on net, which, considering coming into this game, they were not just the worst power play in the NHL, they were 3% lower than any other team, coming in converting on just 11.3% of their power plays so far to this point in the season. So to let them even look dangerous in the first place is already not a terribly good sign. Fortunately, again, though, the Kraken do kill it off, and right as it's ending, the Kraken get the puck and nobody checks Sprong coming out of the box, so he ends up getting a pass at the opposing blue line and getting a completely free breakaway that Gibson ends up making a pretty nice save on. And the next thing you know, it's Schultz to the box on a holding call, and this time the Ducks make the Kraken pay for it. About halfway through the power play, the puck from Fowler and Zegras somehow ends up on the stick of Troy Terry right next to the Kraken net with a little bit of space between him and the next defender, just him and Jones, and he's able to wrap it around Jones' leg and through his 5-hole before he can get his paddle in front of it. And just like that, the Ducks, who were just a few minutes ago looking pretty down and out, down 2-0, with nothing really going their way, now are on the board and have the momentum. Momentum that the Ducks are actually able to hold on to until the last minute, maybe two of this first period, where the Kraken are able to push back enough to at least even things out. Fortunately, though, that pushback in the final seconds leads to another goal as Dunn, coming right down the slot completely unchecked, fires off a shot and buries it into the top corner of the net to make it 3-1 Kraken going into the first intermission. And an underrated part of this goal, because he doesn't actually get an official assist on it, that really is part of what makes it happen in the first place, I mean, you could call it like an honorary primary assist, is Tanev boxing out the Ducks defender who's trying to get out in front to block a potential shot at that side of the net so Gibson can block the other side. Tanev, though, won't let him back into the crease, opening up that shooting lane for Dunn, which he puts the puck right into with a beautiful shot. So we go to the second period with the Kraken not having played the best, or at least certainly not most complete first period ever, knowing full well there's some things they're going to need to clean up. But they still have a 3-1 lead and a team on the other side that, while there's some talented players there, is one they should be able to take advantage of the rest of the way. However, less than 2 minutes into this second period, a puck is thrown from one of the face-off circles towards the net. It's tipped on goal. Jones makes the save, but gives up a rebound straight out into the slot, where the only player there to pick it up, it's Grant, who picks it up, fires it onto the net again, and this one gets past the glove hand of Jones and into the back of the net to make it 3-2 Duck. Well, 3-2 Kraken, but the Ducks get their second goal and pull to within one again. And since these first two goals for the Ducks are probably the worst ones that Jones allows, I will say that he didn't really give up any bad goals necessarily in this game, and while he did make a couple of pretty nice saves, especially in the third period, that kept this one from getting to overtime or worse, he also just didn't really look all that sharp, especially early on in this game through the first couple of periods. So again, not a terrible performance, certainly not very good stat line, but just really not a terribly sharp performance either. Of course, that having been said, the Kraken defense in this game, and penalty kill especially, as we'll see, weren't doing him too many favors either, as the Ducks were able to get a lot of chances off from the middle of the ice. Something that again has kind of been the calling card of the Kraken to this point in the season, really limiting shots from that area from opposing teams, keeping everything to the outside, and just not allowing those high danger opportunities. Not so much the case in this one, as the Ducks were able to open things up by just creating chaos at both ends of the ice. Now, on the bright side for the Kraken special teams wise, while the penalty kills we'll get to a little bit more here in just a second, had probably the worst game of their entire season against the worst power play in the entire NHL, and especially considering that fact, maybe even the worst penalty kill game we've seen from the Kraken ever, certainly up there among them anyway. The power play, which was also against the worst penalty kill unit in the entire NHL, with the Ducks really struggling on special teams on both sides to this point, the power play for the Kraken did have a pretty good game. Now, I say a pretty good game for the power play. It wasn't fantastic by any means. They only end up going 1 for 2 on the power play, so not a ton of opportunities, but they do at least get that one, and it comes at an important point in the game here halfway through the second. About halfway through this power play, halfway through the period, Schultz gets the puck down to Burakovsky. Burakovsky fires off a shot. The save is made, but the rebound goes out to Beniers, who's able to whip around, find the puck, and get the shot off to the other side of the net, burying it into the back of it to give the Kraken the power play goal, and for Beniers, his second point of the game and his 7th goal of the season. So now, once again with a 2-goal lead, even in spite of letting the Ducks kind of hang around there in the first period in the back half of it, and then the non-ideal start to the second period, the Kraken, who were kind of building some momentum going into this power play and then score on it, can finally take control of this game and just put it away. But instead, a few minutes later, they let the Ducks right back into the game with another power play. And the reason that I say they let them back into the game with this power play is because, of course, they end up scoring on it. Now the worst power play in the league, going 2 for 3 to this point in the game. And it's a goal from the Ducks that halfway through this power play, you could see coming from a mile away. With their setup, it's Fowler from up by the point, gets it down to Zegras from one side, who then has a passing lane down next to the net, so wide that you could drive a truck through it. Fortunately for Zegras, who's pretty talented, all he has to do is put a tiny little puck through it. So, of course, he's able to do it fairly easily, putting the puck straight down the middle of that to a wide open McTavish right next to the net on the other side, who one-times the shot into the back of the net with not a lot that Jones can do to try to save it. And just like that, it's 4-3, once again a 1-goal game. And then to make matters worse, a few seconds later, the Ducks are right back to the power play, because of course they are. For the 4th time this game, the Kraken are going to the kill. And it's true, this was not the best officiated game by any means, something that unfortunately Seattle sports fans were all too used to on Sunday. There's really no reason, even in spite of that, to send an opposing team to the power play 4 times in a game. I don't care how good your penalty kill is, which, to this point in the season, overall, the Kraken penalty kill is one of the worst in the league, even with that great run that they had over a couple weeks ago. And even if the opposing team is the worst power play in the league, when you're apparently handing out power play goals like candy, again, going to the box is probably not the best move. And so, of course, on this Ducks power play, as it kind of seemed like going in, it was a foregone conclusion it was going to happen anyway, about halfway through it, it's Zegras who gets the puck down along the boards behind the net, where Terry's able to eventually get a handle on it, get it out in front to Henrique, and he puts it into the back of the net quickly before Jones can really react. This one, I will admit that while Gord had a pretty good game otherwise, he kind of is a little bit slow getting back to that passing lane, and while he does try to get a stick out in front of it, he isn't able to, so that pass gets up from behind the net right out in front to Henrique, and he gets that shot off before Jones can find where the shot's coming from. And the Ducks, with back-to-back power play goals, and now 3 for 4 on the power play in this game, after coming in with an 11.3 power play percentage, they're 75% against the Kraken. They've also tied the game at 4 here late in the second. Mercifully for the Kraken, that was the last power play that the Ducks would get in this game, but it caps off a second period that was an absolute disaster for Seattle. Outside the Beniers goal, they turn what was a 3-1 lead coming into it into a 3-1 period for the Ducks that ties the game at 4. Not to mention the fact that during the second period, both Alexiak and Geekie left the ice. Now, Alexiak did come back, which is a good thing because he left not putting much weight on a knee, which didn't look great at considering he's already missed time due to injury. But Geekie, who ran into Larson, so it was a unfortunately kind of friendly fire thing that ends up hurting him, doesn't end up coming back due to an upper body injury. So the Kraken are down a forward coming into this third period. Thankfully, even in spite of missing Geekie, in the third period, the Kraken are able to at least somewhat pull things together and play a little bit more their style of game. Now, it was far from perfect and far from perfectly their style even at that, as they do allow a couple of pretty nice shots from the slot that Jones makes a couple of very nice saves on to keep this game from, again, getting to overtime or worse over the course of this third period. That having been said, as a whole, the third period was still better played by Seattle than really the 30 minutes previous to it. Pretty much everything since the Kraken took that 2-0 lead early on in the first. And it certainly did also help, at least as far as the nerves of Kraken fans are concerned, that the 5th goal they end up scoring in this game, the one that ends up winning it for them, does come early on here in the third. And it ends up coming from that 4th line that's now without Geekie. And as far as how they replace Geekie is concerned, you might assume that they probably platoon guys in and out, like Gord gets a shift, maybe Wemberg gets a shift, Beniers gets a shift or two. Nope, they pretty much just put it all on Beniers and threw him out there for 2 shifts every time it rolled around. centering the second and fourth line pretty much for that entire third period. And as a result, he ends up getting a third point in the game here as he gets a puck off to Donato as he goes off for a change. Donato gets it to Sprong entering the zone, and Sprong pretty much does the rest, taking an actually pretty similar line to what we saw Eberle score with against the Golden Knights in the previous game, though in part because the Ducks don't play anywhere near as good of defense as the Golden Knights do. He doesn't really have to fight through as many guys to get through the slot from one side to the other, and then from the other side doesn't have to pick up a rebound as he's able to just put the backhand right past the outstretched Gibson and into the back of the net to give the Kraken that 5-4 big sigh of relief goal. And unfortunately here, Gibson does end up getting hurt as there's contact in front of the net between Donato and one of the Ducks defensemen that ends up having him fall on top of Gibson. So Gibson ends up leaving the game, and from there isn't any more scoring. The Kraken do get another power play, though while this one they do get more shots on goal, they don't really make anything of it. Eventually the game does end 5-4, so Sprong's goal is the game winner. And you know what? Honestly, I mean, again, it was an ugly win, and it was frustrating how we ended up with that final score. The Kraken just not even bothering to play on the penalty kill, it seemed like a lot of the time. And the defense definitely getting opened up by the chaos the Ducks were creating at either end of the ice. So not playing that defensive scheme that we've seen the Kraken have success with to this point in the season and get them to where they're at. But they still do end up winning the game. And sure, while you'd like to see them play a little bit stronger games against teams like the Ducks and not just play down to their opponent, they do end up getting the win. And not every win on the season is going to be a pretty one. If you're going to get to the end of the season and be one of the top teams or try to win a division, you're going to have some ugly wins along the way. It's about when you have those ugly games, somehow coming out with points or wins and not letting those ugly games turn into losses, which is, as we know, what we ended up seeing all too frequently last year. And at least as far as the team is concerned, and I do think that this is a good thing, that while they will have some lessons to be learned from this game, especially on the penalty kill, overall, the vibes are very good in that locker room. They're definitely happy with how this road trip is going and getting wins against division opponents, even if one of them is the worst team in the division. And again, winning 5 games in a row is going to feel good regardless of how you end up doing it. Plus, I guess if you're going to have an off game, it's better to do it against a lesser opponent and still come out with a win than do it against teams that you really need to beat, like the Kings, who they play here in a couple of days. Of course, though, before we move on to that Kings game, we still do have to hand out the 3 Kraken stars of this one. And I will say that, as this is normally the case for Kraken wins, it was somewhat hard to narrow this down to 3 stars. This time, because of how this game went, it was more because it was hard to actually pick 3 stars of guys that played complete games. There's one exception to that, though, and he's easily the first star in this one. Another 3-point game, it's Matty Beniers. I don't think that was going to be too much of a surprise to anyone. His second 3-point game of not only his career, but the last 4-game stretch. I think now with 9 points in his last 4 games, so absolutely on a tear since going on a little bit of a points drought there during that last winning streak. But yeah, Beniers absolutely on a tear, and even outside of that, especially with him stepping up and doing basically double duty for the entire third period as a 20-year-old, this guy just continues to impress in new ways. So yeah, easily the best player for the Kraken out on the ice in this one. The next 2, Sprong played a pretty good game, really not a whole lot of detractors. I mean, he doesn't play on the penalty kill almost ever, so he wasn't out there for 3 of the goals the Ducks scored at the very least by default. And he does also have 1 goal and that breakaway out of the box that could have easily turned into another. So a pretty good game for Sprong, all things considered. And then I'll give the other one to Vince Dunn, who also scores a goal in this one. And on top of that, I think this can also be kind of a body of work for Dunn. He's played a lot of really good games where he's kind of on the cusp of being a 3rd star and kind of been like an honorable mention or 4th star. So he also had another very good game in this one and was definitely one of the better Kraken players, so he's deserving of a star, I think, here. But definitely helped out by I just think it was time to get him a star. Regardless, though, as always, I'd love to know what you guys think down in the comment section below, who your 3 stars of the game would be, especially a 2nd and 3rd star if you disagree with the guys I picked. Maybe your just general thoughts on this game. I'd definitely be curious to what you guys think of this game, especially with it, being a win, but maybe not the prettiest win ever, how different people feel about that, and how we feel going into this game against the Kings, a team that the Kraken have now beat twice, but need to continue to beat as they're below them in the standings. Like, just below them. Anyway, until that Kings game, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel. And until the Kraken go for their first ever 6-game winning streak in LA, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.